when we talk about some of these things, like when we say equity, we want the prospect to have equity, right? Typically what we tell Radar is we'd like, and we put it as a percentage, we'd like to have them have at least 30 to 50%, preferably towards that higher end of that range in terms of equity.
Right. And so again, investors have to buy at a discount. And so if they don't have about 30% equity, even if they wanted to sell to us, very often the numbers won't make sense and the bank would not allow the sale without going through the short sale process, which is its own beast. And it is a viable method of buying homes, but that's kind of more of a specialty purchase.
Welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. Today, it is just my co-host Scott and I. Scott, how are you doing this morning?
Dude, I'm doing well. I can tell you and I are on one right now. And I think in part it's because we had to pull an audible this episode.
We did.
But I think also we just haven't been doing these consistently in the new year. You and I both traveled to out-of-state events, which were super, super interesting. But we've lost that like habit of doing it every day.
Yeah.
So it's like when you get to go play golf for the first time in a couple months and you're just excited and then you absolutely woof it on the first tee.
Which is normal, even when we don't go a long way without playing golf. At least for me, that's the normal, even when I'm playing a lot. So
that's whatever that means for how this podcast will go. We'll see.
Yeah, you mentioned pulling an audible. I think we ideally wanted to do a book review today. We tabled it just to make sure we had got through all of the content. We are reading through a pretty hefty book right now that was recommended to us by one of our mentors. So we tabled that to make sure we can put together the best possible podcast and book review for you guys. But that paved the way for us to brainstorm a little bit about, I think, what now will be a little mini series that we will be providing to you guys with some tangible stuff. Mm-hmm. Do you want to introduce our topic for today, part one of the mini series?
Yeah. We didn't come up with the name for the mini series, but we're going to just be talking about tangible, tactical things you can do to grow your business. And I think it was inspired by the conversation we had last podcast regarding, not last podcast, last solo podcast regarding the different stages of our business and how each stage has its own function and how they have to work, and you brought it up, in harmony to make sure that a deal goes smoothly. So today, we're going to talk about what we first discussed in that section of the podcast, which is marketing, setting the tone for how your business will perform. And you and I are neither experts nor, I would say, novices about the topic, and we're going to share what we know and what struggles we have with it, and hopefully provide some insight on maybe where to go next.
Yeah, I think the reason this topic is so important is because I know we've preached it before, but you don't have a business if you don't have leads coming in.
That's
right? There's nothing to work. There's no business to be had if no leads are coming in at all, right? So that really, marketing and focusing on bringing in leads is really step one to anybody trying to build, grow their business in real estate or otherwise. So I think focusing on this topic of marketing, how to bring in leads, what kind of leads to bring in, and all the steps A to Z in between is what we're hoping to give today.
Yeah, I also want to clarify, because you and I always say we give steps A to Z. We're not going to do the work for you. We're not going to tell you exactly which button to press, but we are going to send you to the right tools and the right softwares. And if you have questions, you can DM us personally for more insight.
Absolutely.
I want to share, before we jump into tools and the actual process, let's break down the two types of leads that you can get: inbound and outbound leads. So what, you can pick one and I'll explain the other.
Well, and I even may ask, let me know if you want to touch on this before we get to inbound and outbound, is what kind of people, before we decide if we want to get inbound or outbound leads or how to approach it, what kind of people are we wanting to come in either inbound or reach out via outbound?
Oh, yeah.
That's because true. As we focus in on, and I think for today's example, it'll be good if we hone into real estate investing specifically. You need to figure out who your target audience is. What kind of leads do you want being brought in? You don't want random leads from, you're not a financial advisor trying to bring in new clients, right? You're not a, mobile car wash person trying to bring in new clients and more cars to wash. As a real estate investor, you are trying to find people with problems, whether that's property related or personal related that is falling and trickling in that affects the property.
Yeah. And I also want to clarify that even within that, you want to talk to sellers. That's the key word. Sellers, meaning owners of real property in the market you're buying, that have any reason to consider selling at a discounted price. Because there are going to be, of the total population, like Fresno, I believe there's somewhere near between 500,000 and 1 million people. Mm-hmm. There is only going to be about 10% of the population thinking about selling. And then within that 10% that are thinking about selling, only about another 10% are considering selling at a discount or are viable to sell at a discount. And so we're really looking at the 1%, usually it's between 1 and 2% of your total population that would even consider selling. Because although this is a numbers game, we can't afford to talk to every person in Fresno. I mean, there's large demographics you could rule out right off the bat to help hone in who to talk to, not just talking to anybody anywhere.
Absolutely. And now that we've got our target audience, right? The leads that we want to be bringing in. Let's segue into what you started with, inbound versus outbound. And I'll start with outbound. So outbound lead generating or marketing is where you are doing the actions to make that first point of contact to this pool of prospects, because they're not leads yet, right? This is a pool of prospects, is where you are making that initial action and making that initial touch out to those people. This can include stuff like cold calling, door knocking, SMS texting, right?
Those are the 3 big ones.
I know texting has started, it has been in the process of falling off a lot. Mm-hmm. I personally don't know a lot of real estate investors who are focused on texting as much anymore. However, cold calling still is showing very prevalent. And of course, door knocking, right? A little more time consuming on the door knocking side, right? But you get that personalized individual touch when you door knock.
Yeah. So what are the pros and cons of outbound?
Yeah. Pros and cons of outbound. You are obviously this is the first time you are reaching out and making the first point of contact to this pool of prospects, right? It's that initial contact is very cold and you have a very short amount of time to build trust with that prospect before they dismiss you completely.
You have about 10 seconds.
So you need to have your skill set built up to a base minimum level if you're even going to scratch the surface of getting any luck with cold calling or door knocking, right? Specifically sales skills, rapport building, and stuff like
communication.
That. Exactly.
I think the big benefit about outbound marketing is that traditionally it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. It's a cheaper form of marketing. So if you're new in the business, you have time, but you don't have money, outbound could be a great solution. So cheaper. 2, you can control the number of dials, calls, texts, door knocks you make at a kind of a more day-by-day basis. So if you're slow, you can increase the number of people you're talking to more easily. And then lastly, I think it really sharpens your skills. I don't know almost any investor who will not attribute their sales skills to outbound marketing, because you build a thick layer of skin when you get outbound marketing dialed. It requires you to get a lot of no's before you get a maybe, before you get a yes, before you get paid.
And I think the important thing to note here, you made a really good point that outbound is typically cheaper from a entrepreneur or business owner standpoint. If you're just getting started in the business or have not yet closed X amount of deals to bring in some money that you can dedicate to marketing,
or saved from a main job.
Exactly. Outbound marketing is going to be your best bet. And I think breaking down the limiting beliefs that you need money to start, right? And the reason I preface it with that is, yes, okay, if we focus on door knocking, If you're driving to neighborhoods, yes, you need money to put into your car or a reliable source of transportation, right, to get there and go, right? Specifically talking about door knocking, gas and your time, I think, are really the only costs that are incurred with door knocking.
Post-it notes or whatever you may leave at the house.
Exactly, right? But that's really, like, guys, if you are brand new or if you truly don't have the money to even put into, a dialer or something, and we'll get into some of those tools and specific things that we use. Door knocking is a great way to scratch the surface, right? And when we think about, okay, I'm going to go door knock some homes, I know the prospects that I'm wanting to reach, but how can I tell based on the look of a house if somebody may have a problem or not? And I think that's where, combined with driving for dollars and going door knocking, you need to be targeting houses that have overgrown grass, are in, dilapidated shape, just look not good from the outside, right? You're not going to go down to Copper River. For those listening, that's a country club, high-end neighborhood in Fresno. You're not going to go to Copper River and be door knocking in that neighborhood trying to generate leads as a real estate investor.
Not through visuals.
Not through visuals, right? So coming from the place of you're brand new, have no money. If you've got two legs, you're going to go and you're going to walk and you're going to door knock properties that look like shit.
And you're going to not always be in good areas.
Exactly.
Most of the time, you won't be in good areas in real estate investing.
Yeah.
I want to talk, before we get into the more nitty gritty, I want to talk about inbound. Now, if you're a little bit more experienced or you have some money, this is good even for new investors who maybe have a day job, because they won't have the time to make the necessary amount of calls to create a lead. Inbound marketing would be a little bit more expensive, but less time consuming. And an inbound lead is defined as a prospect reaching out to you and initiating the conversation. Now, that could be a referral. That would be the cheapest and quickest way to get a lead. But if you're brand new, it's maybe not going to be as frequent as when you're at our spot where maybe you're 6-7 years in the business and people kind of have a known name that, hey, you're in real estate. So what are inbound sources of marketing? Those are going to be direct mail, like sending a letter to somebody's home. That could be SEO, search engine optimization, meaning when they look on Google, do they see your website? It could be pay-per-click, which would be advertising on most any of the major, I guess it could be search engines, social media, websites, where you get a lead to click onto your form or your website or whatever. And then there's also pay-per-lead, which are services that handle, like a marketing company. Their job is to master marketing, and then whatever information they get, they sell it to you at a cost. Now, like we already mentioned, this is a little bit more expensive, but the pro is alternative to outbound marketing, where it's a very cold lead, where there's maybe no reason for them to talk to you. This person has some level of motivation to hear you out. And so you have a little bit more time to build rapport, and your sales skills do have to be top tier, because the people that can afford inbound marketing often came from outbound. So there's a similar level of competitive nature that you need to be able to solve problems, and you have to be able to build kind of a relationship. But you know that this person doesn't call you from a piece of mail unless they're curious. And curiosity could come from, we've mentioned some of these before, personal distress, financial distress, property distress. There's plenty of different reasons, and they may not be forthcoming on day one, but day one may not be your only time to talk to them. If they called you, they're probably open to you calling them back.
Exactly. And the only other type of call that you would receive is, and again, from personal experience, people who are absolutely pissed off that you sent them something in the mail, right? Yep. That's one of your two types of calls, and you covered the first one. Somebody who is at least curious enough to pick up the phone and call your number. The other one, obviously somebody being so pissed off, they want you to take them off the list, blah, blah, blah. Important to note, if somebody does call you angry like that, still having, the skills and the personal skills, yes, to take that call, talk them down, and then making sure you are not mailing that person again, so you minimize the amount of reoccurring calls like that.
And reoccurring cost. We don't...
Yes.
Back to the idea, we don't want to market to people not interested. Mail is about 50 cents to $1 or even more per lead every time you mail. If you're mailing 500 people that have told you in the last year to take me off the list, every time you mail, you're wasting $500 because you know that they're not interested. And there is not really a point, unless something changes, to mail them again.
100%. And if you guys, a good episode, if you guys want to dive in more to kind of a success story with direct mail, we had Henry Resendez on the podcast a little while ago. And he, I don't know, maybe the past year or so, he was a full-time contractor, right? Joined a mentorship program, started doing direct mail, right? Because he had the money and it made more sense to invest in direct mail. Dude has done a shit ton of deals over the past year and seen massive success, not only flipping, wholesaling, but also building a rental portfolio. So a good episode for you guys to bounce back on if you're interested on hearing a success story surrounding direct mail.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so we've talked about inbound, outbound. Again, that comes back to the investor themselves. If you have more time than money, preferably go outbound. If you have more money than time, switch to inbound. If you are already successful in one of the two different measures, stick to what you know. I mean, frankly, it's not a bad thing. Even if you have more money than time, you can delegate for your cold calling operation, right? There are programs that you can pay to help you with cold calling. If you are good at that, that has been proven to you and I to be a reasonable source to make a good return. If you don't have a lot of money, but you have a creative mind and a way to hone in to a smaller niche list, I mean, you could mail a smaller niche list. Our only recommendation here is you have to make sure that you have the budget to run with it for 6 to 8 months, preferably 12, for any inbound marketing type, because inbound marketing has an upfront cost that often withers people. And they feel like, I haven't gotten a deal. It's been 60 days. Our business model is not built around a 60-day time frame. It's 6 to 12 months. And you need to be comfortable shelling out. If you have $6,000, shelling out $1,000 each month for 6 months instead of doing $6,000 on one mail piece on day one. So that's the other part. If you're going to go inbound, make sure you have a little runway, because it does take time to convert leads and know if that marketing is actually working or not.
And the cool thing here is whatever option you decide on or may have already currently started, or if you're doing both, right? The pool of seller prospects that you want to target remains the same, regardless of if you're doing outbound or inbound. So let's talk about, right? Okay, I know I want to target sellers, 1. 2, sellers that are experiencing or dealing with some sort of problem that would encourage them to potentially sell their property at a discount. How do we find those people? Now that we know the people we want to target, how do we find those people?
And we're going to plug a lot of tools today. Not a single one of these providers has given us any financial benefit. We are sharing this because this is what works for us, and know that there are competitors in the marketplace that maybe can provide the same thing.
Absolutely.
Starting with data, because this is maybe the question everybody's asking themselves. How do I pull a list? The program that we have used and that we've had good experiences with has been Property Radar. Property Radar functions very well for realtors, if you're a realtor as well, because you can pull up contact information for potential sellers. Say, for example, you door knock a home, you have a good conversation, you can click that property, and you're going to have their name, and you can send them a letter or X, Y, and Z.
The important note about Radar, it is a paid subscription website.
It's $100 a month right now.
Yep. And so again, before we dive into Property Radar, if you're sitting there and going, okay, if you truly don't have $100 to go and build out a list in this program, it trickles back to one of the outbound methods of generating leads, which is door knocking, right? Or driving for dollars, right? So going and finding these addresses that, again, to be blunt, look like shit from the outside, right, is a great place to start. If you do not yet have the $100 a month to put towards Property Radar to build out a bigger list.
I would recommend, if you don't have $100 to spend towards Property Radar, pick up a second job that pays you a couple grand.
Honestly, yes.
We both have done this. We've talked about it. Get a restaurant job. One night's tips as a server in most of the restaurants in Fresno will pay you $50 to $100.
Good point.
Work 2 days a week, and you will cover your tool cost in your first week, and you'll have a little marketing money after.
Boom. Now that we've got this program, Property Radar, that we can use to build out a list, right? Essentially how it works is you, as the user, tell Property Radar what kind of list you want it to generate. You need to give it criteria before it will spit you out a list.
Like any other search engine.
So what are some of the criteria that we've had good luck with, and a lot of people in the industry have had good luck with, when we want to build out a list of potential sellers?
Well, I want to clarify, there's two types of lists when you do this. There are big lists.
Mm-hmm.
Those are typically going to have in the ballpark of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, depending on how big of a market you're in. And then there are niche lists that require a little bit more work, but are a smaller group of individuals. So on a broad level, we want to talk to homeowners, and you can get that. This is Property Radar only looks at homeowners in our market. So you want to clarify, am I looking in Fresno and Madera? Am I looking at cities? Am I looking at counties? Am I looking at neighborhoods? This all can be defined in Property Radar. And then we want to find people who have equity. That's the three biggest things that I would say. Deciding location, equity. I guess I didn't say the third. And third would be any type of property that I'm interested in. So I personally don't buy commercial. I don't really buy agriculture. I don't buy bare land. I don't buy mobile homes. I don't really buy multifamily. So for me, I would put single family homes, condos, and small residential multifamily, which would be a 1-unit home, which is a single family, up to a 4-plex. That's the three main things I would filter for.
And why would equity be an important part of that piece?
Equity is the amount of profit a seller has in a home, unrealized profit. So they bought the home for $100,000. It's worth $300,000 now. I need them to have that room, because if they owe the bank $300,000 and I offer $200,000, the bank will not approve that. But if they owe $100,000 and I offer them $200,000, the seller walks away with $100,000 and the bank is made whole. So you do need to have a little room, if you're going to be buying at a discount, to ensure to cover any outstanding debt and leave room for it to be viable for the seller to accept.
Some other criteria we can also throw in with these bigger lists that we're talking about generating are, one, the length of ownership. How long has this homeowner owned the home? Typically, as it is for tired landlords, they may have owned the property for 10, 15, 20 plus years. Those people who are now in retirement or, well past retirement may have more motivation to sell and get rid of an old or problem property than somebody who has only owned the home for a year or less than 5 years, right? Somebody who just went out and bought their home, even if they got it at a discount and there's equity in there, it's typically not worth having a conversation with someone who's owned their home for only 1 year versus somebody who's owned it for a longer period of time.
Right. And again, like we've already said, there are exceptions to everything we're saying, but we're trying to filter it down to the most likely people. And I'll add to that, the 10 to 15 to 20 years, think about how long that is in somebody's life. They often have either entered into or exited a chapter of life. Mm-hmm. So maybe they bought the home when they were young. This was their first home. They've upgraded since. This was now a rental. Maybe they didn't ever really want to keep it. Maybe they're, like you said, especially right now, 10 years ago, it was 2014, right at the end of the recession. Everything was pretty cheap. Everything was pretty easy. The laws have changed substantially since then. And maybe they're in retirement now, right? So you're looking for people who have a different, chapter of life that doesn't include this property.
100%. And when we talk about some of these things, like when we say equity, we want the prospect to have equity, right? Typically what we tell Radar is we'd like, and we put it as a percentage, we'd like to have them have at least 30 to 50%, preferably towards that higher end of that range in terms of equity.
Right. And so again, investors have to buy at a discount. And so if they don't have about 30% equity, even if they wanted to sell to us, very often the numbers won't make sense and the bank would not allow the sale without going through the short sale process, which is its own beast. And it is a viable method of buying homes, but that's kind of more of a specialty purchase.
And the one last thing I want to mention before we move over to that other type of list you were talking about is one other criteria you can tell Property Radar is whether the home is owner occupied or not. And what that means is if a home is owner occupied, the owner of the home is living there. It's their primary residence, right? Typically, sometimes what we like to do is target a demographic that I mentioned earlier, older landlords, right? So you can tell Property Radar, I only want to see the non-owner occupied properties when I'm building out this list. And that means all of the properties in the list that is generated, the owner does not live in the home. It's either vacant, tenant occupied, or whatever between those, but they do not live in the property.
And again, the reason why that's so helpful is it's one less barrier to clear. Where are you going next is no longer a question. Mm-hmm. If you don't live in the home, this is more of a monetary thing, less about if I sell you the home, where am I going to go? What am I going to buy? How does that look? Now, we buy stuff from owner-occupied sellers constantly, but on a broad scale, if you're looking to target, people who are retiring or are retired, real estate is a young man's game. It takes effort. Maybe they're just tired of dealing with the effort. And when you contact them, they need to have some equity, have the house for a little while, and not living in the home. That's going to limit the pool of buyers that you're going to be talking to.
What about this other type of list? We've talked about the big generalized lists that you can build in Radar. What is the other type of list that we can do?
Yeah, niche lists are going to be the opposite of what we just talked about, where it's very generalized. There's huge numbers. Niche lists, we see niche lists go down to one person a month. And the reason why is because you're adding tons of filters, mm-hmm. right? I thought of an analogy. It's like a dating app. If you leave all the filters off, you have a lot more opportunities to talk to people. But if you want to talk to only one type of person, you're going to add all the filters and you're just not going to have as many people to filter out.
Yeah.
But they usually require more work.
Yep.
They're not all on Property Radar. And the value is the more work you put in up front, the less competition. So although what we just told you is very simple on the broad list, you're going to have a lot of competition. If you can get really good at a niche list, it requires a lot of work up front, but ideally less people are talking to them.
Yeah. The cool and the thing to note about Property Radar, right? So whatever type of list you've built out, and we've talked about both of them, is then now you have to do something with that pool of sellers, right? Property Radar generally on the basic plan you're getting for $100 a month, it will let you pull 10,000 records a month included in your plan, right? And so you then need to export that list, and you now have it in an Excel file, right? And now deciding whether you're going to do outbound or inbound. If you're going and doing outbound, let's talk about the costs and the programs that are associated now that we have the data from Property Radar.
Yeah. So if you would like to cold call, Property Radar does have some phone numbers. But our recommendation, if you plan to call the seller, is to skip trace a lead. Skip tracing is paying a company to go use all the public records to try to hone in on the most likely phone number to be tied to that person. Very often they're wrong. That's part of cold calling, is you get a lot of wrong numbers. But I think it's somewhere in the ballpark of 12 to 16 cents a lead to get phone numbers.
Yep.
Now, that sounds like nothing, but when you scale it up to 17,000 people, that turns into a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so the benefit is you only have to pay for it once, and then you own that data. Versus if you're going outbound, very often you're paying every time you attempt to contact.
One of the best skip tracing websites / companies that we have had a lot of stuff with is batch skip tracing. So batch skip tracing is from at least in our local market, a lot of the investors that we've talked to, both experienced and amateur or even new, a lot of people are using batch skip tracing. We've had great success with it. I know it's usually one of our go-tos when we're talking about skip tracing. So batch skip tracing. Like you mentioned, there is no monthly subscription cost attached to skip tracing. It's on a per record basis.
Right.
Now, diving deeper a little bit more into the outbound, right? So you have this data that you've pulled from Property Radar. You have then gone and skip traced it, but for between 12 and 16 cents per record. You now have a new list of data that has up to 10 possible phone numbers for each of the addresses on your list. You need to now, if you're doing outbound marketing, call those people. And there's a couple different ways. There is a efficient way and there's a semi-free way to do it. Most of the people, I assume, listening have some sort of cell phone where you can type numbers into the phone and make an outbound call. What you can do with that list is, okay, I've got address 1 on 123 Main Street. There are 10 possible phone numbers. I'm going to pull out my phone and I'm going to hand dial each one of these phone numbers to try and see if one of those is the homeowner, and you can have a conversation, right? That's the cost-effective way to do it.
That's the cheapest route.
That's not the way I would recommend at all. Like Scott mentioned earlier, going back to not having the $100 for Property Radar, find a way to go out, and if it's a restaurant job, 1 or 2 nights a week for the month can not only pay for your $100 Property Radar subscription, but can also pay for what's called a dialer, a multi-line dialer. And what a dialer does is you can upload this list with all of the phone numbers, and it's typically on your laptop or on a computer, and it will call through all of those phone numbers. And a multi-line means it's calling multiple numbers at once until someone picks up. So it is way more efficient than finger dialing and taking the time to try and call numbers one by one.
We have a really hard time understanding complex big numbers, but if you had 5,000 leads with an average of 7 phone numbers, which is what I find to be kind of a consistent number, if you were to finger dial each property and it only took you 1 minute to type it in, ring until you either got a connection or the voicemail, assuming you don't talk to a single person for more than a minute, it would take you 73 days calling 8 hours a day with no break. That is an unrealistic expectation to get through a list. With a multi-line dialer, we've seen people get through lists in an efficient manner, but not without like flying through it intentionally. We'll see people go through 10,000 leads a month. That is very, very different.
And also the great thing about a dialer too is you are not having to manually keep track of who has answered and what numbers haven't answered. The system in the dialer will do that for you so that if you did not get an answer from an address or a particular phone number, it'll make note to redial that phone number
at
back
the end of your list.
Exactly. So there's 3 dialers off the top of my head that we've had experience with, and again, these are probably the 3 better dialers. I don't think there may be one better entry-level dialer, and that's Mojo.
Yeah, Mojo dialer is good if you're a realtor as well.
And Mojo, remind me, I'm around 99, or is it around that $100 a month?
I think for the 3 line, it's $150.
So $150 a month, and that's Mojo dialer. The other 2 dialers, they're a little more sophisticated and a little bit more expensive, and that's going to be Call Tools and Batch Dialer. I would say for somebody who's brand new, Call tools, at least for me on a personal experience, has been one of the harder
user
interfaces to try and figure out. Mojo and Batch Dialer, very user friendly. Again, Batch Dialer being a little bit more expensive. I think with the one seat, you're going to be with Mojo again around that $150. Batch Dialer maybe a little bit more around that $200 price point.
Again, if you're getting into real estate investing and money is a problem at that level, I recommend that you work an evening job because you're not going to be calling people at that time very often, and it will bring in enough money to afford you runway to pay for some of these tools.
Boom.
Let's jump out of cold calling and door knocking because I think we've hit on the major points.
Yes.
If you have more questions, we have earlier podcasts. If you look back at the beginning of our YouTube channel or the beginning of our podcast, we go through how to use Property Radar and the dialers kind of on a more intimate level.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the other forms of marketing, which are going to be pay-per-click, SEO, and PPC and direct mail is what we're really going to focus on.
So yeah, rewinding back to where you now have your list from Radar, right? If you are now focusing on outbound marketing with that list, there is no need to go, if you're only doing outbound, you don't need to go and skip trace that data to try and get phone numbers because you're not going to be calling these people. So that's a little bit of reducing costs there. So when you pull that list from Radar, that is ready to go and throw in, and let's talk about mail. If you're going to go and now mail postcards or letters or some other type of mail piece to this list of people you have. Now, you take that list, and one of the better and probably the most generalized site or service that we use for our direct mail is Yellow Letter HQ.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty simple. Again, this is not a monthly charge or anything. You are paying per mail piece. Scott mentioned earlier, you're going to be between. Postcards are around that 50, maybe a little bit higher, 50-cent mark. Letters between $1, maybe $1.50. And so you take your list, you go to Yellow Letter HQ, and pretty simple and self-explanatory. They have their website where you can pick from different designs of postcards, different letters. They have a whole host of options that is not worth us getting into. Go check out the site if you're focusing on outbound marketing. But Yellow Letter HQ being kind of the main direct mail channel or site that we use to send all of our mail pieces.
We have also used what's the handwriting?
Ballpoint
marketing. That's worked in the past as well. It's more expensive than Yellow Letter, and I would recommend using it sparingly because it can be pricey. But if you take your list from Property Radar, you can go to Yellow Letter HQ, pick the template that you like, type in your name and contact info, put in your credit card, click approve. They're going to send you a little template of what it's going to look like on your email in the next day. Then you're going to approve that. They are then going to process the order, type up all the letters, write all the letters, stamp them, and mail them out. And it will tell you what day the mail will be dropping. So you order it on a Thursday. It may drop the following Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
You know that come Thursday, and this is the part that I know everybody I talk to hones about all the time, but it has to be said. If you pay money to mail someone, you need to answer your phone. If you are on the toilet, at dinner, on the phone with mom, it does not matter. This is something that you need to treat as a $40,000 phone call because you do not know who is on the other side of that call and if they are about to call 8 different other investors. And if you miss it, you lose that chance. So there was no point in mailing it in the first place.
I will also say a best practice if you are going to go and mail, you need to list a phone number for the prospect to call, whether it's on a postcard or a letter. We highly recommend do not use your personal cell phone number. You can go, if you have a Gmail account, it is free to go set up what's called a Google Voice number. Do a Google search, type in Google Voice, and log in with your Gmail account, and you can get a free generated local number that you can then use to put on your mail piece, and it will automatically route to your cell phone.
And the reason why you do this is you can set a setting in Google Voice that says show original caller's caller ID or show your Google Voice caller ID. Now, what you do is you set it to show Google Voice caller ID, and you go in your phone and you add a contact called answer this freaking phone or direct mail, whatever it takes to make sure that when, say, Cade calls me through my mail piece, it says on my phone that this is a direct mail call and I need to answer it. I used to have it set up with the name of the list. Mm-hmm. That's how I did it because we were marketing different lists and I wanted to know which mail piece was working the best. Mm-hmm. If you only have one, go Google Voice, set it up, name it whatever, direct mail lead, and every time your phone rings with that direct mail lead, you answer it. And it's your responsibility on the call to talk to them through kind of that introduction, hear out their situation, and confirm their contact info. Alternatively, you can go into Google Voice and you have like a call history and you can write it down, but it's better to confirm it right there on the spot.
And I think that covers what we wanted to share about direct mail. What I'll briefly finish up with on this outbound marketing, you mentioned SEO and PPC, pay per click. On a general level, if you're brand new, I would not recommend it. If you pick outbound, I think if you're new, you start with mail. SEO and PPC is
inbound for mail.
Or inbound, inbound. SEO typically takes a lot longer. Like Scott said, that's when you go, someone does a Google search for you or your company, and we know Google has hundreds and hundreds of pages of people, right? SEO takes a long time to build. Months, if not years, to build a strong SEO presence to where you're one of the top people that pop up when someone searches sell my home for cash.
And there's a lot of techniques. It's not about just existing. There's keywords, there's understanding how Google's search optimization changes. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's whole business services that do this and they cost a lot of money.
In pay-per-click, if you guys obviously have used Google before, you'll see sometimes if you do a Google search, like it'll say sponsored, and those ones pop up at the very top, right? Even before the normal ones. Pay-per-click can tie into that, right? So you're sponsored. It's typically extremely, extremely expensive for pay-per-click. Pay-per-click. It can be. Again, but in order to build your pay-per-click up and kind of that momentum there, again, I always opt, if you're going to do inbound marketing, to start with mail.
Lastly, let's talk about data management. This is our biggest downfall as a company. Cade and I work together, and at this point in time, how many lists off the top of your head do we have? 18 going? Is that
20? Yeah.
Is it somewhere between 17 and 20,
yeah,
I think?
Around that, yeah.
You have to understand when you're talking about big data, corporations pay billions of dollars for data, and you as a small business owner need to treat it as such. We do not have the perfect system for you. What we can say is, when at the start, make sure that you're saving lists under a specific name. So set it up maybe by filters, have specific meanings for each filter abbreviation so that you can see when it was done and a date saying when it was pulled. Data does go bad, right? People's numbers change, people sell, people buy. So you want to track who you've pulled and who you've mailed. And then you also want to have a spreadsheet, and you and I did this when it was a smaller function, that shows, okay, when did I mail the list? What did I send and when did it drop? Mm-hmm. So that we can historically reference back, how many times have we reached out to this group? How much have we spent in total to get the deals that we've done? And on the calling side, okay, when should I be expecting phone calls to start rolling in?
Yeah, whether it's a spreadsheet or even if you're using Google Calendar to track those key dates, right? Or if you are doing outbound marketing, you need to be keeping track of when you are calling. One of our best episodes we've ever done on the podcast was our scheduling and calendaring podcast, which I think is way back episode like 40. Go back and listen to that to realize the importance of keeping track of when you are focusing on your income generating activities, such as outbound cold calling, right? And if it's not a spreadsheet, keeping track of those key mail dates in your calendar so you know, hey, when was it dropped, or when was it ordered, when was it dropped, et cetera, et cetera.
I would recommend that if you have any deals closed and you have any money in your pocket, one of the best things that you can pay for would be a CRM as well. And most of the CRMs that are in the marketplace right now have a data function to help store your data and also have a place to store your leads. And so we're going to talk next episode in this series about how you handle that initial conversation all the way through to the close of an initial escrow. But I would recommend, I think most CRMs start for an annual policy somewhere around 500 to 1,000 for one person. And again, if we have a money problem, I recommend you get a second job. And there is no shame in admitting that maybe $500 to $1,000 is a lot. But I want you to understand, to get this to a point, to get a consistent deal a month, it does require tools.
Absolutely. And I will make note, before episode 2 of this next mini series comes out, where we, like you mentioned, are talking about CRM, managing the official leads that you have generated either from outbound or inbound, and how that process works. I know there's a specific episode, and there's plenty of episodes where we talk about how to handle conversations, right? How to handle conversations with these prospects, whether it's on the phone or an incoming call, right? I think that would be a good refresher. If you're sitting here as a new listener, go check out that episode. So you now know, hey, I now know the marketing piece of it, what data I need to target, and how to manage that, and the tools and things I need to use. Go back, listen to the episode on how to handle the conversations with the prospects that you're having and build up those sales skills. And then when we come back for episode 2 of this mini series, we'll be talking about how to manage those leads in your system.
That's it. I don't know when we're doing our next one for this, because we have a couple planned out.
We do.
Now that we've done this first episode, I think it would make sense to kind of speed run getting these done.
Absolutely.
So in the before summertime, everybody has access.
Boom.
If you guys have questions, if you already have some deals, if you have something going for you, we do want to make sure that you can reach out to us in the meantime for any kind of marketing questions, intake, lead questions, sales questions, escrow processes. We're open books. So do feel free to reach out to us directly, and we would love to help you on a one-on-one basis.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you next week.